I am so thankful to be here with you. I bring you warmest greetings from the dean, the faculty, and staff of Yale Divinity School. I am thrilled to be in the Northeast now. I have been in Durham, North Carolina for almost 30 years. And I'm married to a wonderful woman. She's Bermudian. And so I took her from the warmth of the Carolinas to New Haven, Connecticut, and I pray that she'll fall back in love with me at some point in time. So I'm thankful. And I want to thank Jill and Roy for inviting me and for doing this courageous, important work. You don't know how excited I am anytime I hear from pastors and leaders in the church who really want to think seriously about these matters and think theologically about them. It's a blessing, and I am deeply, deeply honored and thrilled beyond measure to be here. And I'm excited to be with my colleagues who will be sharing in the panel tomorrow morning. We enjoyed a wonderful dinner this evening. We almost didn't make it, but we did. And so thank you all for coming at this urgent hour that we're in. This is an exciting time, and I'm glad to be alive in it. So I feel the need, because this is such a sacred moment, to offer a brief word of prayer as we begin. May I do that? And then begin to offer my lecture, but I sense the presence of the Spirit with us tonight, and I want to honor that presence. So please pray with me. We are thankful, God, for your presence. You lead us never by accident. You lead us purposefully, and we are thankful that you have brought us together tonight. We expect to hear from you, even in the context of a lecture. We expect that you will speak to us because we are your servants, one and all. Many of us here this evening are tired. Our anxiety and our worry has been heavy over these last few weeks. And so I ask that you would refresh us, strengthen us for the long journey, because we know that you are a God that never tires. And we pray that you would grant us your strength, your wisdom, your insight, so that we might run this race with strength and, most importantly, with joy and hope. We pray this in the name of the one who rose from the dead, and in his power we pray, and in his name, amen. So I want to follow my assignment that my dear colleagues gave me. And I've given a little bit of a title to my comments tonight, The Love Work of the People of God. That's what I want you to be thinking about as I'm talking, the love work of the people of God. In 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote the words, famous words, "Where do we go from here? Chaos or community?" He wrote those words as he contemplated the future of this country and its dogged refusal to address its racial present. This is very much our question now as we contemplate this extraordinary moment in this country. We are witnessing a fuller exposure of the interweaving of Christianity and whiteness that has flowed through this national consciousness of this country from its beginning. And now we are faced with the difficult task of addressing what is first and foremost, my sisters and brothers, a Christian dilemma. By calling this moment a Christian dilemma, I am in no way excluding anyone else from sharing in this difficult moment. Not at all. Nor am I trying to boil down any number of complex problems and issues to a problem in Christianity. The current moment is a dilemma for us because we created we created the racial logic that now shapes the Western world. We all know, all of us here know, that the world is not simply black and white and cannot be understood as though it were simply black and white. But we cannot understand this world, this racial world, without understanding the paradigmatic and parenting realities of black and white. Blackness and whiteness are not simply shorthand terms for the historical struggles between Europeans and Africans, or peoples of African descent and European descent. Whiteness and blackness point to the history of a world turned upside down and then enfolded in a new way of being. A new way of being. It was and is a way of being that distorts the creation and denies the full reality and mystery and majesty of the creature. The racial wound, as Wendell Berry so elegantly termed it many years ago, happened because of Christian action. This is the inescapable truth of our history. We were at the potter's wheel, ruining the clay that was in our hands. The historical we is crucial here, my friends, because we are part of that cloud of witnesses, that number that no one can number, many of whom drew the conceptual, physical, and geographic lines within which racial logics and racial reasoning came to life. They gave us the dilemma of whiteness and blackness. The dilemma was formed in the transformation of bodies and land. Christians who came to the new worlds, they did something unprecedented. They separated peoples from land, separated identity from place, separated connectivity from relationality, and turned the world and its multiple beautiful peoples, turned the land and its multiple beautiful forms of life all into commodity form. They turned the world into possession in an absolute sense. They not only made the world and its people sellable, but they taught the world to see itself in fragmentation and enclosure. Think about this for a moment. What is private property if not the victory of fragmentation and enclosure? What is race if not the victory of fragmentation and enclosure? They are two sides of the same coin. Racial vision profoundly distorted our sense of connection and relationality with the earth, with animals, and with each other. Racial vision has made it almost impossible for us to sense our boundedness to other creatures and to the earth itself. It has hollowed out our sense of deep belonging to one another by replacing that sense of belonging with a vision of racial belonging, far more palatable and powerful than Christian belonging. We are in desperate need now of a spiritual practice that would draw us into a reality of belonging stronger than racial belonging. A spiritual practice strong enough to reshape the power of racial belonging. We need a spiritual practice of belonging that we can commit our lives to, that is rooted in the triune life of God, that is rooted in a pattern of belonging that takes seriously God's desire to draw us together into the divine life, to partake of God's own body and blood, and to be filled with the Spirit of the living God. God invites us into an intimate reality of belonging so powerful, so revolutionary, that we continue to struggle to capture the life together God is calling for us to enter and embody. We need a spiritual practice that would counteract racial practice, a spiritual practice that would anchor our political work and our ecclesial vision. We need such a practice now, not only to help us navigate the racial winds blowing against us, but also one that will address the ways our lives and identities continue to be shaped by the racial antagonisms that structure life in the U.S. and in many other places in this world. We can feel, you can sense the structural antagonism in this country now more than ever. That spiritual practice that we need must involve at least three things. And this is what I want to focus on tonight. It must involve at least three things. First, the renunciation of whiteness. The renunciation of whiteness. Second, the humility of a learner. The humility of a learner. And third, a desire for life together that must be registered geographically. It's very important. A desire for life together that must actually touch the ground. Together, these things constitute the love work that we must be about as the people of God for this urgent moment. So you got those three? Good. All right, so let's come back. Let's start with the renunciation of whiteness. Early Europeans inherited theological visions that already housed the symbiotic tropes of whiteness and blackness, that trafficked in the ideas of good and evil, light and dark, life and death within theological language. However, with the colonial period, that reciprocity of white and black would also house a theological way of seeing that formed ideas about the good, the true, and the beautiful around bodies designated as white. Whiteness emerged as the ground for the universal. By the universal, I mean the ability of the one to represent the many. The ability of the one to represent the many, as well as the ability of the one to present reality on behalf of the many. Make sure you got that. The ability of the one to represent the many, the ability of the one to present the reality to the many, right? The reality on behalf of the many. White bodies were established as the primary site for the human in all its weakness or majesty. Whiteness emerged out of Christianity. That's what we have to keep in mind. And unleashed a power that is yet difficult to comprehend unless one understands that Christianity always invokes comprehensive vision. What do I mean by that? So, anyone and everyone may be seen through the lens of sinner and saved. Isn't that right? Anyone can be seen through the lens of faithful or faithless, right? Whiteness moves irrepressibly in the same direction, not only because it unrelentingly generates white body exemplars of beauty, of goodness, of truth, but it also carries forward housing capacities. Housing capacities. That is, patterns of thinking and ways of being, patterns of thinking and ways of being that invite multiple peoples to imagine their worlds through white bodies. A dear friend of mine who pastors a church in Durham, he has a wonderful adopted daughter from Burma, from Myanmar. And he went back, took her back to see her family and to see her people. And he went through, there was a kind of downtown area in the village near where they lived. And he sent me this picture. It was this massive picture of an advertisement for lightening cream. This is in Burma, Myanmar. Lightening cream. And the sign said, white beauty. So the question is, why is a sign like that in a place where nobody looks like that? Unless you understand housing capacities that you can imagine yourself inside of, approximating, if you will, that body. For a myriad of historical reasons, we have not had the conceptual ability to name whiteness for what it is. Listen very carefully. Not a particular people, not a particular gender, not a particular nation, but an invitation, a becoming, a transformation, an accomplishment. It was an accomplishment sought after by immigrant group after immigrant group coming to these shores, hoping to strip away their ethnic past and claim an American future. There was a time in this country when immigrants coming would have never, ever called themselves white. Ever. They would call themselves Italian or Polish. They would call themselves white. Whiteness was and is a way of being in the world and a way of seeing the world at the same time. Whiteness is not a given. No one is born white. It is a choice. It is a choice. Whiteness is not the equal and opposite of blackness. Whiteness is a way of imagining oneself as the central facilitating reality of the world, the reality that makes sense of the world, interprets, organizes, and narrates the world. And whiteness is having the power to realize and sustain that imagination. You got that? To achieve whiteness is not to become European or the strange designation called Caucasian. And after all, historically, Caucasian is an aesthetic category. The gentleman who invented the idea, a guy named Blumenbach, he got the idea because he believed that the Mount Caucasus produced the most beautiful people in the world. Literally, this was science. This was science. And so Caucasian represented an aesthetic decision. These are the most beautiful people in the world, so let's call them Caucasian. Anyone can form their life toward the goal of achieving whiteness. Whiteness positions people to imagine themselves from the plateau of imperial possibility. What do I mean by that? Imperial possibility. That is, that they may have what they want and be in control of their world. Sound familiar? How is it possible, then, to renounce whiteness? The real question is, why would anybody want to renounce whiteness if it is the achievement that so many in this world strive to have and maintain? That's the real question. But that is the point. Whiteness must be maintained for it to exist. It must be maintained in order for it to exist. It must be sustained economically, politically, militarily, and geographically. It's an energy that must be sustained. The renunciation doesn't begin with a speech act. It does not begin by saying, I am not white, or I don't want to be or become white. That's not how the renunciation begins. The renunciation begins for us with proclaiming our identities as Gentiles who have accepted the story of another people as true. We have accepted the God of another people as our God. This is at the heart of our faith, and it has been denied to most of us of the faith. It begins with the recognition that we are what the great theologian M. Sean Copeland calls a thinking margin. We remember, as the writer of Ephesians tells us to remember, that we were outside the covenants of promise made to Israel. We were without God, and as the apostle says, without hope in this world. But the gracious God of Israel, made known to us in Jesus, has brought us near. Renunciation begins with remembering what we never fully learned, that we are a people who came from the margins. We were never in control of the story. And we remember what it feels like to be included. It is that feeling that is so important. What does it feel like to be included? Brought into the center only by the life of one of Israel's children. Renunciation means that we choose to remember the reality of inclusion that is at the heart of our faith. And that inclusion is our way of life. We include because that's what our faith is about, inclusion. We not only choose those at the margins of society, because from the margins our faith came to life, but we also pay careful attention to the ways whiteness constructs the margin. Renunciation must also include a careful analysis of the particular ways whiteness sustains itself in and around us. You see, whiteness always aims at racial invisibility and ignorance for the sake of control. Whiteness aims at ignorance. Pay attention. It aims at invisibility. It wants to be invisible, and it wants to not know. It aims at ignorance and invisibility. Why? For the sake of control. You need invisibility, and you need to claim that you don't know in order to sustain control. It aims to create, here's what's crucial, friends. It aims to create neighborhoods, schools, religious experiences, educational experiences. I slipped and said religious experiences, didn't I? And social settings that normalize the control and or absence of non-white bodies. It seeks to structure ignorance and invisibility. Renunciation means that we press against precisely that. We press against invisibility and ignorance. We press against that control and that absence. It means we push against those processes, economic, political, social, intellectual, and geographic, that help to preserve a world where whiteness is at the center and everything else exists in its service. To move against this energy to center whiteness, and that's what it is, to move against this energy to center whiteness requires we allow ourselves to sense it You have to sense it. And then choose a different place to imagine our work and our lives. We must always remember that wonderful passage from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. I know you have it all memorized, but I'll just tell you once again. It is a marvelous passage there in the middle of that wonderful chapter. It says that Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing instead ill treatment with the people of God. And here's what the passage says, and in this way was following the Christ. That's an astounding passage. He chose not to live out the trajectory of his identity having been formed in Pharaoh's house. We must remember that what made and makes racial vision so powerful is its comprehensive reach, its converting power, if you will. Think of whiteness and blackness as two poles within which it is possible to place all human creatures. Think of it as two poles that generate a field of energy within which people from vastly different ways of life, different places on this earth, are seen and taught to see their existence between black and white. They are not necessarily taught to be black or white. The pedagogical power of this field of energy is that it teaches them to evaluate their life and their life projects on a scale from a derogatory, abnormal blackness, aiming toward a glorious, normal whiteness. It also teaches that we should inhabit a way of being in this world that imagines our identities completely collapsed onto our bodies and our connection to land, space, and place and animals, only made real and consequential economically. That is, only through ownership and possession. So our love work of renunciation aims at collapsing that field of energy by offering us an alternative vision to racial vision. That is, the vision of a Gentile, the vision of Gentiles who live by the grace of Israel's God come to us in Jesus Christ, and whose very way of living is shaped in inclusion. We want to include, we remember what it was like to be at the margins. So, along with renunciation of whiteness and the desire to be white that anyone can have, there must be also the humility of a learner. So, the humility of a learner now. In order to combat the racial condition of the West, as I said, we need a spiritual practice that takes on the humility of a learner as a way of life. We are the inheritors of what I have called a pedagogical imperialism. A pedagogical imperialism. Excuse me. Buried deep in our Christianity, and it is buried deep, which has denied to us, a crucial aspect of the reality of God. The reality of a God who delights in learning. Let me just say that again. A God who delights in learning. God delights in learning of God's own creation. And in Jesus, God learns. Jesus learns, and he teaches. His teaching, however, is embedded in his learning. It is precisely this deeper reality of the incarnation in relation to making disciples that we not only have lost, but many of us have never even been introduced to. We have preferred to impose theological knowledge, denigrate indigenous knowledge, and present a God who knows everything and wants to know nothing, which means we have presented a Christianity that knows everything and wants to know nothing. Because the Christian God is not found in the learning, in this way of thinking, only in the teaching. See, imperial Christianity gave birth to this pedagogical imperialism, which turned the entire world outside the colonial West into perpetual students, perpetual learners, and those in the West as eternal teachers. This pedagogical imperialism gave birth to Western imperialism. It also introduced a form of modern Christianity into the world that is not open to learning, to changing, to adapting, becoming new, but one that assimilates people and or segregates peoples into their own versions of Christianity, who often enter those versions out of the simple desire to be recognized and respected. We need a vision. What we need is a vision of the humility of the learner that is akin to the kind of vision of humility we find in the Rule of St. Benedict. While we know that the monastic gesture that we see in St. Benedict's rule has often been used to underwrite oppression and slavery, patriarchy, the rule also has an important history in helping people rethink their identity and refashion their subjectivity, refashion the way they understand themselves. In his powerful presentation of humility in chapter 7, Benedict presents the 12 steps of humility a monk must take. And with each step, bless you, Benedict is not only presenting a life in self-review, in self-examination, but a life profoundly open to others and to the world. Humility is the key to being a learner and a teacher. And the kind of humility we need today is one that would enter more fully into the way of our incarnate God who took on the way of the creature. As Irenaeus said, in Jesus, God lived out the contours of the creature. Great phrase. God lived out the contours of the creature. God lived out the shape of the creature. The kind of humility we need today is one that embodies the desire to learn the deep histories of the place where we live. It means being open to the expansion of our identities toward the life worlds of those around us. The people around us are a call not just to get to know them, but to open ourselves to them, to the expansion and transformation of our very identities. The kind of learner necessary now is not one who just wishes to learn a few more facts about their surroundings and the people around them, but is one who imagines their world and their work, from within gestures of incarnation, that is, of intentional journeys, constantly entering into the worlds of those we are honored to know in the expansion of our lives into their lives. Now, such expansion is not a new colonial conquest, but an embodied desire for life together. We are disciples of God's only child who desired to learn. It is exactly the reality of God's desire that must shape this third element of a spiritual practice of belonging necessary for this moment, and that is a desire for life together that must be registered geographically. Y'all still with me? Everybody still with me? All right, good. Thank you. I'm so glad. You see, any spiritual practice that would help us in this moment must speak to the reformation of our desire. The commentary in the book of Acts, this is one of the things I'm clear now on, having spent so much time looking at this book, and we can talk a bit about this, more about this tomorrow. But in the book of Acts, what you notice is that almost no one is doing what they want to do. Everybody is being pressed by the Spirit to do exactly what they don't want to do. Think about it. Go back and look at the book. And what the Spirit is always pressing people to do in the book of Acts, from the start to the finish, is to desire people they don't desire. Right? Invite me back another time and we'll talk about the book of Acts. I'm just so excited. So any spiritual practice that would help us at this moment must speak to the reformation of desire. Yet the reformation of desire necessary now is one that follows the direction of the Spirit of God in challenging our cultural, aesthetic, nationalist, and geographic sensibilities. One of the most devastating effects of whiteness is that it has been the energy that has driven its opposite, cultural nationalisms. Everywhere, peoples have been subjected to the formative powers of whiteness. They have been forced into protective gestures to sustain identity, cultural integrity, memory, story, indigenous knowledge, and practices. Peoples the world over have been forced into the strange work of negotiating racial and cultural assimilation, which has burdened people with worries over cultural authenticity or betrayal, with loss and the fear of loss of identity, and with real struggles over self-loathing and self-love. This has rendered Christianity as a segregationalist religion that encourages racial, cultural, and intellectual cul-de-sacs, little corners for my own kin, color, and kind, as we say in the South. Yet the reformation of desire necessary for us now follows the work of the Spirit, who always presses us toward those we would prefer not to know, not to love, and certainly not to join. The joining, sisters and brothers, if you don't get anything else tonight, the joining is everything. It's everything. At the sight of Gentiles being joined to Israel, at the sight of Antioch instructing Jerusalem regarding the new that God was doing in the world, we come to see God's desire embodied in us, where peoples are sustained, upheld, and loved through the joining. It is through the joining that a world is framed in love and faith is presented in its most intensely inclusive reality. The point is not that I know my people and love my people and thereby love myself, but that you know my people and love my people and thereby come to know yourself in a new way. Did you get that? The point is expansion of identity through love and life together. Segregationalist ways of being cannot be overcome by thought alone. They must be addressed spatially, in space and time. The final and most important thing I must say to you in this regard is race is a matter of geography. And we will not be able to overcome our racial dilemma until we get serious about the geographic formation and sustaining of racial identity. Racial calculations and spatial calculations have always flowed together in the history of the colonial West, and we live in the powerful undertow of that history. What haunts me is the way Christianity has been and continues to be complicit with and subject to this undertow. Christian faith in life continues to be driven by the geographic winds created by land developers, city planners, civil engineers, real estate agents, city government officials, and architects. We are, however, not simply passive spectators to the constant geographic turnings of contemporary life. We have performed our faith right on top of these developments, often presenting them as natural and normal ways of forming life and living in the world, when in fact they have never been natural or normal. There is nothing natural or normal about the geographic patterns of our country, of our cities, of our towns. There's nothing normal about that, friends. You must never make it normal. It is deeply sick. Place and space for us are always designed. The spatial placement and configuration of land, property, and life. Land, property, and life roll out together and shaped by a racial past and dictating a future. Like most of you in this room, I was taught not to see what was in plain sight, that my world was configured by segregated spaces. Oh, there was a lot of language about economics and prices that are, just driven by the market, but we know better. That's by design. The church has, for the most part, been oblivious to this reality and oftentimes supportive of it. We have been the high priest of segregated spaces, servants to the economic desires that create them. But economic desire alone is not the only driver of what I call our violent geography. We live always in the wake of that energy that drives what I call geographic whiteness, with its desire to create communities that normalize white dominance by creating communities that structure ignorance and invisibility. You have to have space to have ignorance. If you don't control space, you cannot control the work ignorance does. You have to have it. We narrate our spaces with the distribution and arrangement of racialized bodies always as an economic and emotional backdrop. Our thinking about the places we live and work, the places in which we learn and play, the places that are built up or torn down, anticipate patterns of movement of racialized bodies. Our geographic senses are always haunted by racial anxiety. The struggle to control land and spaces and establish geographic whiteness is the untold story of American history, and especially of this past election. But that history marks almost every square mile of this country. Of course, let me be clear. It is not that this country, city after city, town after town, was developed and then enacted racial segregation. Segregation has been a fundamental engine that informed and informs the planning, building, zoning, and organizing of life flows and places. We yet live in the geographic history that we did not create. We follow the patterns that have established habits of fragmentation and isolation that teach us to be oblivious to what is going around us. We have normalized the absurdity of grotesque disparity in quality of life, separated by only a few miles or a few yards. We have been trained that if there is death and destruction and poverty and sadness half a mile from us, we imagine it's not connected to us. That is the strangest thing in the world. We have to understand how strange that is, that we don't realize that it's the same space. But the answer, sisters and brothers, is not a few more mixed neighborhoods. What is needed is a new way of imagining social life by reimagining geographic life. a new way of challenging racial belonging by reimagining geographic life. So wherever I go, I like to say this. I think there are three things that need to be done. First, we must learn and tell the true story of space. Wherever I go, I encourage churches and church leaders to learn the history of their space. What was here before this church building? Who lived here? Who was moved in order for this church to be built here? But there's a wider story that we must learn, and that is the story of the city or town that we live in. We must learn the history of the racial geography of our town or city. What has been the geographic history of non-white people in this town? Where did they live? Where were they told they could and could not live? When did that change? How did it change? Has it changed? How was and is geographic whiteness organized and established spatially here? How was resistance to minority presence deployed here? These are the kinds of questions we want to ask because we believe in a God who creates and that we are that God's creation. We not only want to know, but we need to know. We need to know this history because the social history of a place is always inside its geographic history. Always. More importantly, the root of most of the problems of any city or town comes back to this geographic history, which shows us the history of the flow of goods and services, opportunities and disadvantages. What is crucial here is to learn the truth and tell the truth. We cannot begin to address the racial disparities and the racial antagonism in this country until we acknowledge and even confess the geographic construction of it all. We need something like a truth commission for every city or town that lays out in as much detail as possible the way life has come to be shaped in particular community, neighborhood by neighborhood. We need that. Second, churches must involve themselves in the geographic shaping and reshaping of communities. We can no longer afford to be ignorant about these matters. I would love to see Christians start asking questions about it all, about the placement of buildings, the formation of neighborhoods, the designation, mapping, and pricing of spaces. Zoning policies, which are never natural. They are never natural. One more time. They are never natural. Somebody made that stuff up, right? The zoning policies, real estate operations. Real estate operations. You need to understand what real estate people understand. Those of you who do real estate, you know what I'm talking about. The plans of land developers, which most people in the community have no idea about. And those are the people who decide the future. All of that, I would love to see Christians start asking questions about. Such questions and reflection should be a fundamental part of what we learn in church and, of course, in the academy, but I'll fight that another night. We should invite everyone into discussions about the morality of geographies, asking whether we are perpetuating a violent geography by seemingly benign land development decisions. Admittedly, these are very complicated matters, but the absence of a moral compass in these matters continues to have devastating effects on the lives of so many people. The compass that drives these matters now is controlled by local political economies, calibrated to race and racial ecologies, calibrated to the market. We need to invite people to imagine and build toward new forms of community and habitation that reverse violent geographies and challenge geographic whiteness. And finally, thank you for your patience. Finally, It is important to see the connection between space and discipleship. The connection between space and your vision of belonging. Your vision of belonging, sisters and brothers, has to hit the ground. It can't just be in your head. It has to hit the ground. The great Native American religious scholar and theologian, Vine Deloria Jr., who not enough people know about and not enough people read, once said that Christians think temporally, but they do not think spatially. What Vine Deloria Jr. was pointing toward was the historic problem of a faith offered to indigenous peoples that told them that time was far more important to God than space. It's a terrible heresy. That time, all God cares about is the future time, not the present space. Terrible heresy. So it was told to indigenous peoples, and they found that to be absolutely absurd. After all, they were told, we wait for a new heaven and a new earth. It was and is a faith that believes strongly in the time of salvation, but has never understood fully the space of salvation. Space of salvation. We do not yet understand the redemption of space. The redemption of space. Space and place matter to God. God waits on us to touch the space. Because space is the arena of divine meeting. Not just time, but space. You must think space before you think time. You must think space. Where is my body in relationship to your body? We'll find the time if we have the space. But if we don't have the space, the time will always be just episodic, always be fleeting, because the space is not there. There must be space, right? I'm sorry, I'm getting too excited about this. The tragedy we inhabit is that our visions of discipleship, its reach, its quality, its character, are all controlled by the shape of our geographic imaginations. We imagine the building of the church as the horizon of the calibration of our discipleship. And it is not. The issue here is how people imagine space and create living spaces, how people seek to know and love their real neighbors, not their theoretical neighbors. And my hope is that you will start to correct this in your own life, correct the grotesque absence of spatial awareness within the Christianity you and I have inherited. So a desire for life together must be registered geographically, and the character of our witness is found in precisely the form of spatial life we are striving to live. So, we need a spiritual practice that teaches us to yield to the Spirit of God in the joining, one that invites us to ask the question, who are we avoiding being drawn to? And in what ways are we resisting the Spirit of God's desire to join us? So I am suggesting a spiritual practice or a set of spiritual practices that cultivate a sense of belonging that might challenge the power of racial belonging for us. These three aspects, the renunciation of whiteness, the humility of a learner, and a desire for life together registered geographically, are crucial for a new spirituality of belonging. I am convinced we urgently need to take on this important love work. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.